The hum of the semi-truck's engine was a constant drone, a monotonous lullaby that played against the backdrop of a bitter Kansas evening. I was driving for a warehouse company, a job that demanded long hours and monotonous stretches of highway. It was a cold Monday, the kind where the chill seeps into your bones and seems to linger despite the truck's heater struggling to keep up. I had left at 3 p.m., determined to make it to my destination by nightfall, but as the hours passed, the road stretched endlessly before me, a black ribbon winding through the darkness. The clock on the dashboard ticked past 7, and the fatigue was setting in. I could feel it tugging at the edges of my consciousness, threatening to pull me under. I had been pushing the truck 5 miles over the speed limit, desperate to make up time, but now it felt like I was driving through quicksand. My eyes were heavy, my vision blurring, despite the flickering headlights that sliced through the inky blackness of the road. That's when I saw a figure in black, standing eerily still on the roadside. My first thought was that it was some drifter, or maybe a hitchhiker desperate for a ride. But as I approached, the figure abruptly vanished into the woods, swallowed by the shadows as though it had never been there. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of exhaustion, and told myself it was just a trick of the light. A few miles down the road, another figure appeared. This one crossed the road in front of me, moving with a deliberate, almost unnerving slowness. I didn't want to see it, I didn't want to think about it. I was tired, and my mind was playing tricks on me. I looked away, focusing on the road ahead, hoping that if I ignored it, it would disappear. I didn't even want to think about what could be hiding in the shadows on either side of the highway. When I finally decided to pull over for a break, the truck's engine sputtered to a stop, leaving me in an oppressive silence. I climbed out, stretching my legs and shaking off the creeping unease. The cold air was bracing, but it did nothing to clear the fog of weariness that clung to me. I walked to the back of the truck, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, that the figures I had seen were just the products of a tired mind. But as I rounded the corner of the truck, my heart nearly stopped. There, standing outside my truck, was the same figure I had seen before. Dressed in black, with a scarf wrapped tightly around its neck, the figure seemed almost to blend into the darkness. The scarf was the same deep, inky black as the rest of the figure's clothing, and it fluttered slightly in the wind as though moved by an unseen hand. I stood frozen, my breath visible in the cold night air, my heart thudding wildly against my ribcage. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It was as if it was waiting, patiently, for me to make the next move. The silence was suffocating, the kind that presses against your ears and makes you want to scream just to break the oppressive quiet. I took a hesitant step forward, my mind racing. I wanted to confront the figure, demand to know what it wanted, but a primal fear held me back. I had heard stories about the things that lurk in the darkness, the ghosts of the highways that claim lost souls. I had always dismissed them as nothing more than folklore, urban legends meant to frighten children. But now, standing here, I felt a bone-deep chill that told me this was no mere story. The figure remained motionless, its face obscured by the darkness and the scarf that shielded it. I took another step, my boots crunching on the gravel, and finally, the figure turned its head slightly, just enough for me to see the glint of its eyes, or at least, the absence of them. The eyes were hollow, dark voids that seemed to draw in the light around them. Panic surged through me, and I backed away, stumbling over the uneven ground. My mind was a whirlpool of confusion and fear. I had to get back in the truck, drive away, escape this nightmare. But as I turned to run, the figure's voice cut through the silence, a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You're not alone," it said, its voice a cold caress that sent shivers down my spine. "You never were." I fumbled with the truck's door, my hands trembling as I struggled to get inside. The figure did not move, did not follow. It remained standing there, an unmoving sentinel of the night, watching as I hastily climbed back into the cab and slammed the door shut. I turned the key in the ignition, and the truck roared to life, its engine a welcome sound in the oppressive quiet. I sped away, the road stretching out before me as I tried to outrun the fear that clung to me like a second skin. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but the figure was gone. swallowed by the darkness from which it had emerged. The rest of the drive was a blur. I reached my destination in a state of disheveled panic, my hands still shaking as I parked the truck and locked the doors. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep, not tonight. The image of that figure, those hollow eyes, would haunt my dreams, or rather my nightmares. As I sat in the dimly lit cab, waiting for the first light of dawn to break the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was still out there somewhere. And I couldn't help but wonder if it had been a warning, a sign of something much more sinister. In the cold, pre-dawn light, the highway looked just as it always had, but I knew better now. The shadows held secrets, and some things were best left undisturbed. So if you find yourself driving down Highway 54 late at night, keep your eyes on the road and your mind clear, because you never know what might be waiting in the dark, watching, waiting for you to slip up just once. I had been making deliveries in this sleepy North Carolina town for nearly 3 months, and each day seemed more like a chapter out of some forgotten horror novel than real life. The houses were scattered like a child's wayward toys, spaced out so far that you might as well have been in the middle of nowhere. The trailers, rusty and forlorn, looked like they were barely holding on to their own secrets. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to encounter that day. It was a hot, oppressive afternoon. The kind of heat that feels like it's trying to smother you with its weight. I pulled up to yet another trailer, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin. I'd seen this particular trailer a dozen times, but today was different. Today, I had a package to deliver, and something about this place felt off almost as if it were holding its breath. The door creaked open, and there she was, a woman with eyes darting nervously around the room. Her skin was the color of old parchment, and her hands trembled as if they were trying to suppress some unseen horror. "You're here for the package," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. Her gaze kept flitting toward the hallway, as though she was expecting something or someone. I handed her the package, my own fingers itching to retreat from her clammy grip. I could sense the unease radiating off her, a palpable force that seemed to grow thicker with every passing second. She motioned for me to come inside, her movements jerky and unnatural. "This way," she said, leading me down a narrow hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. My boots made hollow echoes on the worn carpet. Every step seemed to drag out an uneasy silence, as though the trailer itself were holding its breath. She stopped in front of a door at the end of the hallway, its surface scarred and battered as if it had been clawed at repeatedly. "In here," she said, her voice barely audible. My skin prickled. It was as though every instinct was screaming at me to leave, but curiosity darker than any shadow drew me closer. The door swung open with a groan. I took a deep breath and peered inside, my heart pounding like a caged animal. The room was dimly lit, barely illuminated by a single flickering bulb. In the corner of the room stood a small closet with its door slightly ajar. I could hear something, a low, guttural noise coming from within. It was like the sound of someone sobbing, but twisted, distorted, as though it was coming from the very depths of despair. "Who's in there?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts to sound steady. The woman's face went ashen. "Just ... someone. They don't mean any harm. I just need them to stay hidden for a while." Her eyes darted around the room, and I could see the desperation etched into every line of her face. I took a cautious step towards the closet, my heartbeat loud enough to drown out the eerie sound from within. I could almost feel the heat of the room closing in on me, stifling. As I reached for the closet door, the woman's breath came in quick, panicked gasps. The closet door swung open with a groan, revealing a sliver of darkness. I peered inside, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There, huddled in the back of the closet, was a figure shrouded in shadows, with eyes glowing like coals in the darkness. They stared back at me with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of reality. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. The figure's gaze seemed to reach out and grab hold of my soul, pulling me into a void of unspoken terror. The woman let out a shrill, panicked cry, and I could see the terror in her eyes as she rushed to close the closet door. "Please," "You need to leave," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "It's not safe here." I backed away slowly, every instinct screaming at me to get out. I turned and bolted down the hallway, the sound of my pounding footsteps mingling with the unsettling noise from the closet. I didn't stop until I was outside, gulping in the hot, oppressive air, as though it were my only lifeline. As I sped away from the trailer, the image of those glowing eyes haunted me, searing itself into my mind. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light, or perhaps a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew the truth. Some things are better left unseen, and some places should never be revisited. I drove away, the trailer disappearing into the distance, but the terror would follow me for a long time to come. In that small, unassuming trailer in North Carolina, I had glimpsed a darkness that defied explanation, a darkness that would forever linger at the edge of my consciousness, waiting for the moment when I would least expect it to return. The sun was sinking behind the jagged peaks of the California desert, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and molten gold. I was cruising down a lonely stretch of highway, the kind where the asphalt seems to unravel into nothingness. My old Jeep's engine was the only sound breaking the oppressive silence, and I had long since stopped counting the miles. The desert was like a waiting maw, and I was driving straight into its mouth. That's when I saw it. Just off the road, bathed in the eerie glow of its hazard lights, was a Chevy Impala. It looked like a ghost car, its metal skin rusting under the relentless sun. My curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled over. The sight of that car, abandoned yet beckoning, felt like the start of a bad omen. I parked my Jeep and approached the Impala. The lights were still blinking rhythmically, but there was no sign of life, no driver, no passengers. The desert wind carried a faint, metallic scent, mingled with the arid dust. I looked inside the car. The seats were empty, except for a crumpled map on the passenger side and a lone coffee cup on the floor. It was almost too neat, like someone had left in a hurry, but had taken care to leave everything behind. As I turned to head back to my Jeep, I noticed a dirt road leading off into the darkness. My gut twisted with unease, but the night had a way of stirring up the kind of courage you didn't know you had. I followed the road until I saw the old gas station, one of those relics that had seen better days when disco was king and the world still believed in Saturday nights. The gas station stood alone, its sign flickering weakly. The building was a crumbling shell, its once white walls now smeared with the grime of countless desert storms. The pumps were long dead, their hoses twisted like skeletal fingers reaching out for something that would never come. I pushed open the door, which groaned on its hinges. The inside was shrouded in darkness, save for the flickering light of a single, dying bulb hanging from the ceiling. The air inside was thick, heavy with the musty odor of disuse, and something else, something that sent a shiver crawling up my spine. That's when I heard it. A sound, almost too faint to identify at first, like heavy breathing, but not quite human. It was a rhythmic, labored exhalation, punctuated by the softest whispering, like a voice trying to speak from the depths of a dark, forgotten place. I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, my hands trembling. I reported a potential crime scene. My voice was shaky, and I could hardly bring myself to explain what I was hearing. It felt like the gas station was alive with something malevolent, something that had been waiting in the dark. I dared to step further into the station. The whispering grew louder, and the breathing seemed to close in around me, pressing against my ears like the weight of the desert night. I switched on the flashlight, its beam slicing through the murk. What it revealed was beyond anything I could have imagined. There was a pool of blood, dark and sticky, congealing on the cracked tile floor. It spread out like a grotesque flower, the kind you'd see in a nightmare. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I was rooted to the spot, my mind racing to piece together what I was seeing. The sound of tires crunching on gravel yanked me from my paralysis. I turned to see headlights cutting through the dark as a car pulled up outside. I rushed back to the entrance, and there, silhouetted against the desert night, were the state troopers. They moved with practiced efficiency, their flashlights turning the station into a stage for their investigation. I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. The troopers took over, their authoritative presence turning the once desolate station into a scene of urgent activity. I watched as they went inside, their faces set in grim lines. One of them glanced back at me, but there was no comfort in his eyes, just a tired acknowledgement of the horror that had taken root here. I didn't stick around to watch the details unfold. I climbed back into my Jeep, the desert stretching out before me in its oppressive silence. The Chevy Impala was still there, its hazard lights still blinking, but I didn't look back. The desert had swallowed up more than just a car that night. It had taken a piece of my sanity with it. As I drove away, the gas station's flickering light faded into the distance. The whispering and the breathing seemed to follow me, a ghostly echo carried on the wind. I knew one thing for sure: some places were meant to stay abandoned, and some secrets were better left buried in the sands of the desert. The desert road stretched on, indifferent to the terror it had witnessed. I was a lone traveler, escaping the shadows that lurked in the darkness, but I knew the memory of that night would stay with me forever. It was the kind of night that makes you wonder if there's something out there, lurking just beyond the reach of the headlights. Around 4 a.m., on a Saturday, when the highway was a stretch of asphalt winding through an endless darkness, I was alone, my car slicing through the black veil of night. The radio was silent, static buzzing softly, a constant reminder that the world outside was asleep, or so I thought. That's when I saw it. A gray Honda Accord coupe barreling down the interstate, the kind of car you wouldn't remember even if you tried. It was speeding, dangerously so, and there was something about the way it moved that made my spine tingle. It wasn't just the speed, it was the erratic swerving, the way it darted and veered, like the driver was fighting against an unseen force. In the dim light, I saw her, a woman in the back seat, banging on the window with desperate, frantic motions. Her face was a mask of terror, the kind that makes you want to look away but forces you to stare in horror. I could see her eyes wide and pleading, her mouth forming silent screams that would never reach anyone's ears. The sight was like a knife twisting in my gut, a premonition of something dreadful. I tried to make sense of it, thinking maybe it was a domestic dispute or a carjacking. But as the Honda swerved again, the driver's intentions became clear. It wasn't just a fight, it was something far more sinister. And then it happened. In one heart-stopping moment, the car lurched and the woman was slammed against the window, her body thrown violently. I could only imagine the pain she must have felt, the sheer terror as she was tossed around like a rag doll. My instincts kicked in. I grabbed my phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The operator's voice came through, calm and steady, but I could hardly focus on the words. I told them what I saw, my voice barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might summon something even more terrible. I started following the Honda, my eyes glued to its every move, my heart pounding so loudly I feared it might burst from my chest. "Stay on the line," sir, the operator said, but the words were drowned out by the roar of the engine and the rhythmic thud of my own heartbeat. The Honda weaved between lanes, the driver clearly aware of my pursuit, and began to accelerate even more, as if trying to outrun the nightmare it had unleashed. The woman's screams were now visible through the back window, each bang on the glass a desperate plea for help. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as I trailed the car, the highway now a blur of neon lights and shadows. The Honda was relentless, its driver a man possessed by something dark and malevolent. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles white, as I tried to keep the car in view while providing updates to the dispatcher. Then, as if answering a prayer, the flickering red and blue lights of a state trooper appeared in the distance. The trooper seemed like a beacon of salvation amidst the chaos. I felt a surge of hope as the patrol car closed in on us, the headlights illuminating the Honda's every erratic movement. The trooper, a lone figure of authority in the oppressive night, maneuvered into position and with a burst of sirens, forced the Honda to pull over. I watched with bated breath as the trooper approached the car, his silhouette framed against the flashing lights. The driver's door was yanked open, and within moments the man was dragged from the vehicle, his resistance futile against the trooper's authority. The woman, battered and bruised, was helped out of the back seat. Her eyes were vacant, her face a canvas of pain, but she was alive. The scene was a macabre tableau under the harsh, flickering lights of the patrol car. As the state trooper and additional officers took control, I watched from a distance, the fear still coiling in my gut. The driver was cuffed and led away, his face a mask of defeated rage. The woman was placed in an ambulance, her injuries severe but survivable. I stayed behind, my mind reeling from the horror I had witnessed. The police took my statement, and as the adrenaline faded, I found myself alone once more, the silence of the highway now almost unbearable. The sky began to lighten, the first hints of dawn creeping over the horizon, but the night had left its mark on me. The screams of the woman, the terror in her eyes, would haunt me for a long time. As I drove away, the gray Honda Accord Coupe was nothing more than a memory, a shadow of a nightmare that had passed through my life. But the image of that woman, her silent screams etched into my mind, was a reminder of the darkness that lurks even in the quietest hours of the night. The night had wrapped itself in a heavy, oppressive silence as I drove down Route 20, somewhere between the heart of Chicago and the distant promise of Massachusetts. The road was slick with a recent rain, and the headlights of my car cut through the darkness like two narrow beams of hope in a sea of despair. I'd been on the road for hours, my mind as weary as my body. I'd grown accustomed to the lonely stretches of highway, the monotonous hum of the engine, the occasional flicker of a distant street lamp. It was a familiar solitude, one I thought I could handle. But then, the pickup truck appeared. At first, it was just a shadow in the rearview mirror, a faint, unsettling impression of headlights, but nothing more. I paid it little mind. The truck was tailing me, but I was used to that people in this part of the country seemed to have a particular talent for driving way too close for comfort. But then it began to act. Aggressive, unforgiving. The truck surged forward, its high beams blinding in my mirror, a relentless assault of white light. I tried to shake it off, changing lanes with a quick flick of the wheel, hoping the driver would take the hint and move on. But the truck remained glued to my bumper, the driver's intentions as clear as the night was dark. I could feel a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. The pickup truck wasn't merely tailgating, it was trying to force me off the road. It began weaving from side to side, a malevolent presence in the rearview mirror. My heart pounded, adrenaline surging through my veins as I fought to keep control of the car. I tried to outmaneuver it, weaving and speeding up, but it was relentless. The truck seemed to anticipate my every move. Each time I tried to break free, it followed with a sinister precision. I could almost feel the malevolent gaze of the driver, like a predator stalking its prey. The eerie glow of the truck's lights cast long, distorted shadows on the rain-slicked road, making the night seem like an endless tunnel of despair. Desperation gnawed at me as the road ahead stretched out in an unforgiving black void. I saw a red light ahead and knew that it would be my only chance to make a break for it. The light turned red, and I made a split-second decision that could only be described as reckless. I slammed on the gas and blew through the intersection, the screech of my tires a frantic cry for escape. The pickup truck hesitated for a moment, the headlights dimming as if the driver was calculating their next move. For a heartbeat, I thought I had lost it. But the momentary reprieve was fleeting. The truck roared back to life, its engine a guttural growl that echoed in the stillness of the night. I pushed the pedal to the floor, the speedometer climbing as the pickup truck struggled to keep up. I could see the outline of a Walmart parking lot in the distance, its neon sign flickering like a distant beacon of safety. I aimed for it, hoping the security lights and the presence of other vehicles would deter the truck from following. The pickup truck seemed to understand my intentions, and with a final burst of speed, it peeled away, disappearing into the darkness as abruptly as it had arrived. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, expecting to see it coming back, but it was gone. The sense of relief was palpable, but it was tinged with an unsettling sense of unease. Who was that driver? Why had they targeted me? I pulled into the Walmart parking lot, the bright lights of the store washing over me like a sudden burst of daylight. I parked near the entrance, feeling the tremors of fear still coursing through me. The night was still, but the silence felt different now, heavy, almost as if it were pregnant with 1,000 unspoken threats. I sat in my car for a few minutes, trying to steady my racing heart and gather my thoughts. The night had turned ordinary once again, but the fear lingered like a ghost at the edge of my consciousness. I couldn't shake the feeling that the pickup truck would return, that the driver was still out there waiting. As I finally mustered the courage to step out of my car and head into the store, the night silence was deafening. The Walmart's fluorescent lights were a stark contrast to the darkness that had chased me, but the comfort they offered was fleeting. I knew that I would never look at the road the same way again. The pickup truck was gone, but the memory of its relentless pursuit would haunt me for a long time. It was around 1 a.m., and the fog had rolled in so thick you could cut it with a knife. The highway stretched before me like a ribbon of despair, lined with shadows that seemed to writhe and shift as the headlights of my car cut through the gloom. I had been driving for hours, trying to outrun the restless thoughts that plagued me after a long, bitter argument with my wife. The road was deserted, save for the occasional flicker of streetlights that barely penetrated the fog's suffocating embrace. I was lost in the monotony of the drive when I saw a solitary car parked on the shoulder, its engine off and its interior lights casting a ghostly glow. The car was an old, rusted thing, the kind you might expect to find abandoned in a junkyard. My heart thudded uneasily against my ribs as I noticed the figure standing beside it, a man, drenched by the fog, who was frantically waving at me. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe he needed help. Maybe he was just another soul stranded in the middle of nowhere. But as I drew closer, an inexplicable shiver ran down my spine. There was something off about the way he moved, something desperate and almost frantic. His gestures were jerky, as though he were trying to signal me with more urgency than normal, and his face was partially obscured by the fog and shadows. I rolled my window down just enough to exchange a few words, but a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. The man's eyes seemed too wide, almost vacant, as though he were not entirely present. His voice was an unsettling rasp that cut through the fog. "Can you help me? My car's broken down." "Sorry," I managed to stammer, my voice coming out as a strangled whisper. "I don't have time. I didn't get a chance to finish. My headlights caught a movement in the periphery, a second figure, emerging from the mist with a baseball bat gripped tightly in his hands. His silhouette was menacing, the bat held like a weapon poised for a strike. The fog seemed to cling to him as if it were part of his own shadow. My instinct screamed at me to get out of there. I fumbled with the window controls, trying to roll it back up, but my fingers were clumsy and slow. The man with the bat was now advancing toward my car with a deliberate, menacing pace. I could hear the faint sound of the bat tapping rhythmically against the asphalt, each tap like a heartbeat echoing through the dense fog. Fear surged through me, and my heart pounded in my chest like a drum. I yanked the gear shift into drive, my tires screeching as I sped away from the roadside horror. My eyes were glued to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those two figures chasing after me. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, the fog curling around me like a living entity, trying to pull me back into the nightmare I had barely escaped. As I drove, the panic subsided into a cold, shaking dread. I finally reached a small town, the lights of its few buildings casting a reassuring glow through the fog. I stopped at a gas station, my hand still trembling as I recounted the events to the startled attendant. He listened with a mix of skepticism and concern, but he took down my details and promised to report it to the local authorities. I didn't wait around to see what, if anything, would come of it. I left as quickly as I could, and I haven't driven along that stretch of highway since. The image of those two figures, the desperate man and the one with the baseball bat, haunts me still. Every time I see a car broken down on the side of the road, my heart skips a beat. I can't help but wonder if they are still out there, waiting for the next unwitting traveler to stumble into their trap. It's been months, and I tell myself it was just a bizarre encounter, a trick of the fog in the late hour. But deep down, I know that the fog never fully lifts from that stretch of highway, and the shadows that lurk within it are still very real. And every time I pass a deserted stretch of road, I can't shake the feeling that those shadows are watching, waiting for the next chance to reach out from the mist. It was a night shrouded in the kind of darkness that felt alive, pulsing with unseen rhythms. The COVID-19 pandemic had turned our lives upside down, leaving the streets eerily quiet, except for the occasional hum of a solitary car or the whisper of the wind through deserted alleyways. I found myself driving down an old parkway, my headlights slicing through the black, trying to make sense of the world that seemed to have gone completely mad. As I navigated the winding road, my thoughts were interrupted by the faint glimmer of hazard lights flickering from a car parked on the side of the road. The car's dull, red glow was like a beacon in the desolation, and as I drew closer, I saw a man standing next to it, pacing with an anxious energy. He wore a thick, woolen coat that seemed out of place for the unseasonably warm night. I pulled over, my curiosity piqued by the man's desperation. He was clearly in distress, his face partially hidden by the brim of a cap that was pulled low. I rolled down my window, and he quickly approached. "Hey, I'm sorry to bother you," he said, his voice trembling just a little. "My car won't start, and I need to call for a tow. Can I use your phone?" Something in his voice made me uneasy, but I dismissed it as the anxiety of the situation. I agreed, and as I handed him my phone, I noticed something odd. The keys to his car were dangling from the ignition. "You might want to check if it's just a loose connection," I suggested, trying to be helpful. "Yeah, I've tried everything," he muttered, but his eyes darted nervously around. I glanced at his car, an old, beat-up sedan that had seen better days. He moved back to the driver's side, and I noticed how the interior light flickered faintly, casting strange shadows on the front seats. My stomach churned with a vague sense of unease. As he fiddled with the dashboard, I leaned against my car, trying to ignore the ominous quiet of the night. The man's voice was a low mumble, punctuated by occasional frustrated grunts. Then, a strange noise made me jump, a shuffling sound, like someone shifting in the back seat of his car. My heart pounded as I glanced over, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping over me. I took a step back toward my car, telling myself it was just the wind or the car's suspension making strange noises. Suddenly, a hand shot out from the back seat of the sedan. It was pale and skeletal, its grip tight around the edge of the car's door. I barely had time to react before a figure lunged at me from the shadows, its movements quick and predatory. I stumbled backward, my heart racing as I scrambled to get back into my car. The figure, dark and indistinct, was already climbing out of the back seat, its intentions clear. I managed to slam the door shut and fumble with the keys. Just as I was about to turn the ignition, I heard a gunshot ring out, sharp and loud in the stillness. The bullet whizzed past my window, making me flinch. My breath came in short, panic gasps as I threw the car into reverse, slamming the accelerator and screeching away from the scene. I drove like a man possessed, my thoughts a tangled mess of fear and confusion. When I finally reached the safety of my home, I found my phone missing, stolen in the chaos. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The thief had stolen not just my phone, but access to my financial accounts. The Bitcoin I had been saving for years was gone, vanished into the ether of the digital world. In the days that followed, I felt a creeping dread that seemed to seep into every corner of my life. Strange noises at night, a cold draft in rooms I was certain were sealed, nothing overtly alarming, but enough to make my skin crawl. I found myself jumping at every little sound, my mind playing tricks on me. I never confirmed if these disturbances were connected to the night of the attack. But each time I glanced at the space where my phone used to be, I felt the ghost of that night whispering through the darkness, reminding me of the peril that lurks just out of sight. The whispers of that night continue to haunt me, a chilling reminder of the dangers that can lie hidden in the shadows of a seemingly ordinary evening.